Dr. David Chen never thought he would hold the fate of two entire worlds in his hands. But there he was, standing in a sterile, white medical bay aboard the diplomatic ship, watching the most powerful alien ruler in the galaxy slowly fade away before his eyes. The Zephyrian queen lay on the medical table, her usually bright silver skin now dull and gray. Her breathing came in short, painful gasps. The purple marks that decorated her face, signs of her royal bloodline, were starting to turn black. David had seen this before in the lab. It was the final stage of the disease. She had maybe 6 hours left. "Doctor, there has to be something you can do," pleaded Captain Williams, the mission commander. His face was pale with worry. "If she dies, this whole peace mission falls apart. We'll have war with the Zephyrian Empire within a month." David stared at the test results on his tablet. He had been working for 72 hours straight, trying every possible cure. The Zephyrians had brought their best doctors, too, but none of them understood this particular sickness. It was something new, something that had never existed before. 3 days ago, everything had been going well. The peace talks between Earth and the Zephyrian Empire were making progress. After years of small conflicts and misunderstandings, both sides were finally ready to work together. Trade agreements were being discussed. Cultural exchange programs were planned. It felt like the beginning of a new era. Then, someone released the biological weapon. David still couldn't believe that humans had done this. Some extremist group that wanted the war to continue had somehow created a disease that specifically targeted Zephyrian biology. They had infected the Queen's food during a diplomatic dinner. By the time anyone realized what was happening, she was already sick. The worst part was that the attackers had been clever. They had made the disease in a way that would kill the Queen slowly, giving everyone time to see her suffer. They wanted to send a message. Humans couldn't be trusted. Peace was impossible. "Sir, I do have one option," David said quietly, looking at Captain Williams. "But it's extremely risky." "What do you mean?" David pulled up his research files on the tablet screen. "I've been studying this disease for the past 3 days. I think I understand how it works. The problem is that it changes constantly. It adapts to whatever medicine we try to use against it. That's why nothing has worked so far." The Queen stirred slightly on the table, her large eyes opening to look at David. Even though she couldn't speak English very well, he could see the intelligence. There, she understood she was dying. "But I noticed something interesting," David continued. "The disease stops changing when it encounters a living host that it hasn't seen before. It gets confused for about 30 minutes while it tries to figure out the new biology. During that time, it's vulnerable." Captain Williams frowned. "I don't follow. If I inject myself with the disease at the same time I give her the cure, my human biology will distract it. The disease will spend its energy trying to understand my system instead of fighting the medicine. It should give the cure enough time to work in her body." The silence in the medical bay was deafening. Everyone stared at David. "Doctor, Captain," Williams said slowly, "are you saying you want to deliberately infect yourself with this thing?" "It's the only way. The disease has to encounter both of our biologies at exactly the same moment. If I wait even a few minutes, it won't work." "But what happens to you?" David looked at the test results again. He had run the calculations dozens of times, hoping for a different answer. "Human biology is different enough from Zephyrian that the disease probably won't affect me the same way. But there's no guarantee. I could get very sick. I might not survive." Dr. Peterson, the other human medic on the team, stepped forward. "David, this is crazy. You're talking about playing with a biological weapon that was designed to kill. We don't know anything about how it might mutate in a human body." "I know the risks," David said firmly. "But look at her." He pointed to the Queen, whose breathing was getting weaker. "If she dies, millions of people on both sides will suffer in the war that follows. How can I not try?" Captain Williams shook his head. "I can't authorize this. Command would never approve such a dangerous procedure." Then, don't tell them until after it's done. The Queen suddenly spoke, her voice barely a whisper. Through the translator device, her words came out in accented English. Human doctor, why would you risk your life for me? Your people and mine, we have been enemies. David walked over to her bedside and looked into her eyes. Because you're not my enemy. You came here to make peace. Someone tried to destroy that peace by hurting you. I won't let them win. The Queen studied his face for a long moment. If you do this thing and you die, your people will blame mine. The peace will still fail. Maybe. But if I don't try, and you die, the peace definitely fails. At least this. Way! There's hope! Captain Williams grabbed David's arm. Doctor, please think about this. There has to be another way. Sir, I've been thinking about nothing else for 3 days. This is the only chance we have. David began preparing the injection equipment. His hands were steady, but his heart was racing. He had never been particularly brave. In school, he had always been the quiet kid who preferred books to adventures. Even joining the Space Medical Corps had been more about curiosity than courage. But, standing there, watching the Queen struggle for each breath, he felt something change inside him. This wasn't about being a hero. It was about doing what was right, even when it was terrifying. If this works, the Queen whispered, I will not forget your sacrifice. Just focus on getting better, David replied, filling the syringes with both. The cure and a sample of the disease. The galaxy needs leaders who care about peace. He positioned the needles at their injection sites. The Queen on one side, himself on the other. If he had calculated wrong, if the timing was off by even a few seconds, they would both die. Captain Williams put his hand on David's shoulder. Are you absolutely sure about this? David thought about his sister back on Earth, who had always believed he would do something important with his life. He thought about all the families on both human and Zephyrian worlds who just wanted to live in peace. He thought about the future that could exist if this worked. I'm sure, he said, and pressed both needles home at exactly the same moment. The next few hours passed in a blur of medical monitoring and desperate hope. The Queen's condition began to improve almost immediately. The disease in her system, confused by the sudden appearance of human biology, failed to adapt quickly enough to stop the cure from working. David, however, fell unconscious within an hour. When he finally woke up 3 months later in a hospital on Earth, the first thing he learned was that the Queen had survived and returned to her home world. The second thing he learned was that the peace mission had been declared a failure. Anyway, the political damage from the biological attack had been too severe. His heroic action had been classified. Officially, the Queen had recovered due to Zephyrian medical intervention. David's sacrifice was erased from the record, deemed too controversial for public knowledge. He was quietly discharged from the Space Medical Corps and given a new identity on a distant colony world. The government told him it was for his own protection, but David understood the truth. He had become an embarrassment, a reminder of a failed mission that everyone wanted to forget. As his transport ship carried him away from Earth toward his new life in exile, David stared out at the stars and wondered if his sacrifice had meant anything at all. Queen Zara sat alone in her private chambers, staring at the holographic display that showed the vast expanse of her empire. Thousands of worlds, billions of subjects, countless responsibilities. Yet her thoughts always returned to one human, Doctor who had saved her life 10 years ago. The silver ceremonial crown felt heavy on her head tonight. She had just finished another long day of council meetings, trade negotiations, and diplomatic ceremonies. Her advisors always praised her wisdom, calling her the greatest leader the Zephyrian Empire had ever known. But Zara knew the truth. Every good decision she made, every peaceful solution she found, it all started with the memory of that human's selfless act. Your Majesty, came a soft voice from the doorway. Her personal aide, Keth, entered with the daily reports. The evening briefings are ready for your review. Zara nodded but didn't turn away from the display. Keth, do you ever think about debts that can never be repaid? The aide paused, clearly surprised by the question. I'm not sure I understand, Your Majesty. In our culture, when someone saves your life, you owe them everything. Your honor, your future, your very existence belongs to them until you can return the favor. Zara's voice was quiet, almost lost in thought. But what happens when that person disappears? When you can't find them to honor the debt? Keth had served the Queen for many years and knew better than to ask direct questions about her past. Instead, he simply said, "Perhaps the debt can be honored in other ways, Your Majesty, through actions that reflect the spirit of their sacrifice." Zara smiled sadly. I've tried. Do you know why I established the medical aid programs for border worlds? Why I always choose negotiation over force? Why I pardoned the rebels on Sector 7 instead of having them executed? Because you are wise and compassionate, Your Majesty. No, Keth. Because a human doctor once risked everything to save the life of someone he barely knew. Someone from a different species who couldn't offer him anything in return. He showed me what true courage looks like. She touched a small device on her desk, a translator unit similar to the one that had allowed her to speak with Dr. David Chen all those years ago. She kept it there as a reminder, though few people knew its significance. The memories came flooding, back as they did every night. The pain of the poison coursing through her veins, the desperation in the medical bay. The moment when the human doctor looked into her eyes and chose to risk his own life for hers. She remembered his words. You're not my enemy. You came here to make peace. After returning to her home world, Zara had immediately tried to locate Dr. Chen. She wanted to honor him, to reward his sacrifice, to show the galaxy what real heroism looked like. But the human government had classified everything about the failed mission. Official records stated that she had recovered due to advanced Zephyrian medical techniques. The doctor's name appeared nowhere in any document. Your Majesty, Keth said gently, the morning council meeting has been moved up. There's news about the pirate attacks near the human border colonies. Zara's attention sharpened immediately. For months, raiders had been striking trade routes and civilian settlements in the outer regions where human and Zephyrian space intersected. Both governments were under pressure to do something, but military action in that area was politically sensitive. What's the latest report? 3 more attacks this week. The pirates seem to be getting bolder. They hit a medical supply convoy bound for Kepler 442b yesterday. Several people were injured. Zara stood up abruptly, her heart suddenly racing. Kepler 442b was a small colony world, barely important enough to appear on most star charts. But intelligence reports had mentioned it before, a place where humans who wanted to disappear from the galaxy often went, a place where a disgraced former Space Corps doctor might choose to start over. Prepare my personal fleet, she said suddenly. Keth looked surprised. Your Majesty, the Council was planning to send Admiral Vex with a standard patrol force. No, I will handle this personally. But Your Majesty, leading a military operation yourself is highly unusual. The Council will have questions. Zara walked over to her window, which looked out over the capital city of her home world. Millions of lights twinkled in the darkness, representing millions of lives that she was responsible for protecting. But somewhere out there, in the vast space between the stars, was one life that she owed everything to. Tell the Council that these pirate attacks are threatening the stability of human-Zephyrian relations. As Queen, it's my duty to personally ensure that our response doesn't accidentally start a diplomatic crisis. It wasn't entirely a lie. The border region was indeed sensitive, and a heavy-handed military response could cause problems with the human government. But Zara's real motivation was much more personal. Over the years, she had developed a network of contacts throughout the galaxy, traders, diplomats, information brokers, who could sometimes provide details that official channels couldn't. Recently, one of these contacts had mentioned something interesting. A human doctor on Kepler 442b who had unusual knowledge of Zephyrian biology. A man who kept to himself and seemed to be running from something in his past. It could be anyone. It could be nothing. But it was the first real lead Zara had found in 10 years of searching. That night, she called a private meeting with her most trusted advisor, General Thane. He was an old friend who had known her since before she became Queen, one of the few people who knew about her life debt to the human doctor. "You're really going to chase after ghosts in the border systems?" he asked, concern clear in his voice. "It's not chasing ghosts if he's really there, Thane. And if he's not? If this doctor on Kepler 442b is just another human trying to make a living in the colonies?" Zara was quiet for a moment. "Then I'll eliminate some pirates and strengthen our diplomatic relationships. It's not a wasted trip. But that's not why you're going." "No," she admitted. "I'm going because I have to know. For 10 years I've carried this debt, this guilt. Every night I wonder if he survived the disease he caught saving me. Every day I make decisions based on lessons he taught me in those few hours we spent together. I need to find him, Thane. I need to thank him. I need to show him that his sacrifice mattered." General Thane studied her face. "And if you find him? What then? You're a queen now, Zara. You can't just invite a human doctor to come live in the palace. The political implications alone—" "I don't know what happens then," Zara said honestly. "But I know what happens if I don't try. I spend the rest of my life wondering. I continue to rule an empire while carrying the weight of an unpaid debt. That's not the kind of leader I want to be." The next morning, Zara stood on the bridge of her flagship, watching the stars stretch into lines as they jumped to faster-than-light speed. Her fleet was small but powerful, enough ships to handle any pirate force they might encounter, but not so many as to alarm the human authorities. As they traveled toward the border systems, Zara found herself thinking about what she would say if she actually found Dr. Chen. How do you approach someone whose life you've probably ruined with your gratitude? How do you explain that you've spent a decade searching for them not for any political reason, but simply because their kindness had changed the way you saw the universe? She had practiced the words 1,000 times, but they never felt right. Maybe there were no right words for a situation like this. Maybe some things could only be communicated through actions. The journey to Kepler 442b would take 3 days. Zara spent the time reviewing intelligence reports about the pirate attacks and preparing her fleet for combat. But in the quiet moments between official duties, she allowed herself to hope. Somewhere out there, the man who had saved her life was possibly still alive, still helping people in his quiet way. Soon she would know for sure, and maybe, just maybe, she could finally begin to repay the debt that had shaped her entire reign. The stars continued to blur past the viewports as the fleet raced toward an uncertain reunion that was 10 years in the making. David wiped the sweat from his forehead as he finished treating another injured miner. The small medical clinic on Kepler 442b wasn't much to look at, just 3 rooms with basic equipment and supplies that were always running low. But it was home now, and these people needed him. "Thanks, Doc," the miner said, flexing his newly bandaged arm. "That plasma cutter accident could have been a lot worse. Just be more careful next time, Jake, and keep that bandage dry for at least a week." David was cleaning his instruments when the emergency alarm started blaring across the colony. His heart sank. The pirates had been getting more aggressive lately, and the small settlement had no real defenses. He rushed to the window and looked up at the sky. What he saw made him freeze in place. Ships were dropping out of hyperspace above the planet, but these weren't the rough patchwork vessels the pirates usually flew. These were sleek, elegant craft. with the distinctive curved design of the Zephyrian Empire. David hadn't seen ships like these in 10 years, not since— No way, he whispered to himself. The largest ship in the fleet was magnificent, easily 3 times the size of the others, with ceremonial markings along its hull that David recognized from his old diplomatic training. It was a royal flagship. But what would Zephyrian royalty be doing in this remote corner of space? The answer came quickly. The alien ships began moving with military precision, hunting down the pirate vessels that had been terrorizing the trade routes. David watched through his clinic window as the elegant Zephyrian fighters outmaneuvered the raiders with ease. Within an hour, the pirate threat that had plagued the region for months was completely eliminated. But one of the Zephyrian ships wasn't joining the battle. A smaller transport was descending toward the colony, heading straight for the landing pad near David's clinic. David's hands started shaking. He told himself it was just a coincidence. There were millions of Zephyrians in the galaxy. The chances that this had anything to do with his past were impossibly small. The transport landed with barely a sound, its advanced engines much quieter than the human ships David was used to. A ramp extended from the side, and several figures emerged. David could see Zephyrian soldiers in ceremonial armor, but they stepped aside to make way for someone else. She walked down the ramp like she owned the entire planet. Tall, graceful, with the distinctive silver skin and purple facial markings that David remembered from his nightmares and his dreams. Her clothes were different, more formal, more regal, but there was no mistaking who she was. Queen Zara looked exactly as he remembered, except for the weight of authority she now carried in every step. David found himself walking toward the landing pad without consciously deciding to move. His legs felt like they might give out at any moment. After 10 years of believing he was forgotten, of thinking his sacrifice had been meaningless. Here she was. They stopped about 10 feet apart, just staring at each other across the dusty ground. The Queen's large eyes were fixed on his face, as if she was trying to convince herself he was real. "Dr. David Chen," she said finally, her voice carrying clearly across the distance. The translator device she wore rendered her words imperfect. "English, just like before." "Your Majesty," David managed to reply, though his voice came out as barely more than a whisper. "I have been searching for you," she continued, "for a very long time." David felt a dozen different emotions hitting him at once. Relief that she had survived and seemed healthy, confusion about why she was here, and a deep, aching sadness about all the years that had passed. "I thought," he started, then stopped. "I thought the mission failed. The peace treaty was never signed. I assumed the war happened anyway." Queen Zara stepped closer, her expression softening. "There was no war, Dr. Chen. Your actions saved both our peoples, but at a great cost to yourself." She gestured to the simple medical facility, the rough colony buildings around them, the dust and poverty of the frontier world. "This is not the life you deserved after what you did." David looked around at his humble clinic, then back at the magnificent royal ship behind her. The contrast was almost funny, if it wasn't so painful. "I don't understand," he said. "If there was no war, why was I discharged from the Space Corps? Why did they send me here and tell me to forget about everything that happened?" The Queen's facial markings darkened, a sign of emotion that David remembered from their time together in the medical bay. "Because your governments were afraid of what it would mean if people knew that one human had prevented an interstellar war through an act of pure compassion, afraid that it would make their politicians look small and selfish by comparison. So they erased me from the record. They tried to, but I never forgot. I could never forget." A small crowd of colonists had gathered at a respectful distance, watching the incredible scene unfold. Most of them had never seen a Zephyrian before, let alone their queen. David was dimly aware of their presence, but all his attention was focused on the woman who had haunted his thoughts for a decade. "I need you to understand something, Queen," Zara said, taking another step closer. "Every peaceful treaty I have signed, every conflict I have resolved without violence, every humanitarian program I have created, all of it stems from what you taught me in those few hours we spent together." David shook his head. "I didn't teach you anything. I just did what any doctor would do." "No," she said firmly. "You showed me what it means to put someone else's life above your own interests. You risked everything for a stranger from another world, someone who couldn't offer you any reward. That lesson has guided every decision I've made as a ruler." The weight of her words hit David like a physical blow. All these years, he had believed his sacrifice was meaningless, that the peace he had tried to save had crumbled anyway. But she was telling him that his actions had shaped an entire reign, influenced decisions that affected billions of lives. "Why did you come here?" he asked quietly. "Because I owe you a debt that I can never fully repay. Because I needed to find you and tell you that your sacrifice mattered more than you can possibly imagine. And because—" She hesitated, then continued. "Because I have carried the guilt of your exile for 10 years. My survival cost you everything. Your career, your recognition, your place in history." David was quiet for a long moment, trying to process everything. Finally, he said, "I made my choice freely. I knew the risks. But you didn't choose the consequences that followed. You didn't choose to be forgotten and discredited while I went on to rule an empire." The afternoon sun was starting to set, casting long shadows across the landing pad. In the distance, David could see the other Zephyrian ships maintaining their patrol, making sure no more pirates threatened the system. "Your Majesty," David said carefully, "why are you really here? You could have sent a message through diplomatic channels. You didn't need to come personally." Queen Zara looked uncomfortable for the first time since her arrival. "There are political complications. My presence here with you could be misinterpreted by both our governments. Some people on both sides prefer the old tensions. They profit from conflict." As if to prove her point, David noticed that some of the Zephyrian soldiers were scanning the area constantly, their weapons ready. This wasn't just a social visit, it was a dangerous one. "Then maybe you shouldn't have come," David said, though part of him was grateful she had. "I had to. I've spent 10 years wondering if you were alive, if you blamed me for what happened to your life, if you regretted saving me. I couldn't rule effectively while carrying those questions." David looked into her eyes and saw genuine pain there. This powerful queen, ruler of countless worlds, had been carrying guilt about him all this time. Somehow, that knowledge began to heal something inside him that had been broken for years. "I don't blame you," he said simply, "and I've never regretted what I did, not once." For the first time since her arrival, Queen Zara smiled. It was a small smile, tentative and fragile, but it transformed her entire face. In that moment, David could see past the royal authority to the person he had saved all those years ago. "There's something else," she said. "Something I need to tell you about why I'm really here." Queen Zara's words hung in the air between them like a promise and a threat. David could see the tension in her posture, the way her guards were positioned around the landing area. Whatever she needed to tell him, it was serious. The pirate attacks weren't random, she said quietly, glancing around to make sure no one else could hear. "My intelligence networks have been tracking them for months. Someone has been supplying the raiders with weapons from both human and Zephyrian sources. This whole situation was orchestrated." David felt a chill run down his spine. Orchestrated by who? People who profit from conflict. Arms dealers, corrupt politicians, military contractors who get rich when our species fight each other. They've been watching us both, David. They know about our connection from 10 years ago. The implications hit David like a physical blow. They're using us as targets. Exactly. If they can eliminate both of us in what looks like a pirate attack, they remove a symbol of cooperation between our peoples. I become a martyr who died trying to protect human colonies, and you become collateral damage. The extremists on both sides get what they want, a reason to restart the conflicts. David looked around at his simple medical clinic, at the colonists who were still watching from a distance. These people had nothing to do with galactic politics. They just wanted to live their lives in peace and raise their families. Now they were in danger because of his past. Your Majesty, maybe you should leave, if staying here puts everyone at risk. No, Queen Zara said firmly. Running away won't solve this. These people will just find another way to create the crisis they want. Besides, I have a proposal for you. Before David could ask what she meant, one of her guards approached quickly. Your Majesty, we're detecting unusual energy readings from the asteroid belt. 3 ships trying to stay hidden. Queen Zara nodded grimly. It's starting. They waited until I was on the surface, away from my main fleet. She turned to David. I need to ask you something, and I need an honest answer. Do you trust me? David looked into her eyes and saw the same determination he remembered from 10 years ago, when she had been dying, but still thinking about the peace negotiations. Yes, he said without hesitation. Then come with me. Help me end this properly. I'm not a soldier, Your Majesty. I'm just a doctor. That's exactly why I need you. These conspirators are expecting a military response. They're prepared for that. But they're not prepared for the doctor who saved the Queen's life to stand beside her publicly. Your presence changes everything. David understood what she was suggesting, and it terrified him. You want to make our connection public, after 10 years of secrecy. It's the only way to stop this cycle. If people know the truth about what happened, how one human's compassion prevented a war, it becomes much harder for the extremists to promote hatred between our species. A new alarm started sounding from the Zephyrian ship. The hidden attackers were making their move. We don't have much time, Queen Zara said urgently. Will you trust me one more time? David thought about the past 10 years of his life. The quiet exile, the simple medical practice, the belief that his sacrifice had been meaningless. Then he thought about what the Queen had just told him, that his actions had shaped a decade of peaceful policies, that his choice in that medical bay had rippled across the galaxy in ways he had never imagined. What do you need me to do? Queen Zara smiled, and for a moment she looked less like a royal ruler and more like the person he had saved all those years ago. Help me save some lives, just like before. The next few hours were unlike anything David had ever experienced. The attacking ships revealed themselves, trying to catch the Queen's transport on the ground, while her main fleet was occupied with cleanup operations in orbit. But Queen Zara had anticipated this move. Instead of running, she ordered her ship to broadcast on all frequencies, human and Zephyrian emergency channels, commercial networks, even pirate communication bands. The message went out across the entire sector. The Queen of the Zephyrian Empire was on Kepler 442b, standing beside Dr. David Chen, the human who had once saved her life. 10 years ago, her voice carried clearly across space. This man risked everything to prevent a war between our peoples. He sacrificed his career, his recognition, and his future because he believed that peace was worth any personal cost. Today, enemies of that peace are trying to eliminate both of us to restart the conflicts that bring them profit. David stood beside her as she spoke, his heart pounding. Around them, colonists had gathered to listen. Above them, ships from both human and Zephyrian fleets were converging on their location. The attackers found themselves in an impossible situation. They couldn't fire on the Queen without also hitting the human doctor, whose story was now being broadcast across the galaxy. They couldn't retreat without admitting their purpose, and they couldn't complete their mission with so many witnesses watching. But they tried anyway. The first shots came from the asteroid belt, plasma bolts designed to look like standard pirate weapons. Queen Zara's guards immediately formed a protective Circle, their energy shields creating a barrier of light around the landing pad. "Get to the medical center," David shouted to the colonists. "Away from the landing area." But Queen Zara grabbed his arm. "No, David. We stay together. That's the whole point." She was right, and David knew it. Their partnership, standing united in the face of danger, was the message that needed to be sent. They had survived an assassination attempt together 10 years ago, and they would do it again. The battle was brief but intense. The attacking ships, outnumbered and exposed, tried to break through the defensive perimeter. Queen Zara's military training showed as she coordinated the response, while David did what he did best, treating the wounded. When one of the Queen's guards was hit by weapons fire, David was there immediately with his medical kit. When a stray shot damaged the shield generator, Queen Zara personally repaired it, while David provided cover with a borrowed weapon he barely knew how to use. They worked together like they had in the medical bay a decade earlier. Two people from different worlds, united by a common purpose. The attackers were eventually captured alive, which proved Queen Zara's theory about the conspiracy. Under questioning, they revealed connections to arms dealers and corrupt officials on both sides of the human-Zephyrian border. The plot went deeper than anyone had suspected. But more importantly, the galaxy had seen something unprecedented: a human doctor and an alien queen, working side by side to protect innocent lives. The image was broadcast on news networks across dozens of worlds. As the immediate danger passed, David and Queen Zara found themselves alone again in his medical clinic. The formal ceremony was over, the media attention had moved on, and the political ramifications were just beginning. "So what happens now?" David asked, cleaning blood from his hands. "The secret is out. Everyone knows who I am and what I did." Queen Zara looked tired but satisfied. "Now we deal with the consequences. Both our governments are going to have questions. Some people won't be happy about the truth coming out." "Are you going to be in trouble for this?" "Probably. But it was the right thing to do." She paused, then smiled. "Besides, I learned from the best that sometimes you have to risk everything for what you believe in." David realized that something had fundamentally changed. For 10 years, he had been living in the shadow of his past, trying to forget the sacrifice that had defined his life. Now, suddenly, that sacrifice was public knowledge. He could never go back to being just another frontier doctor. "What about you, David? What do you want to do now?" David looked around his simple clinic, then out the window at the stars where Queen Zara's fleet waited in orbit. For the first time in 10 years, he felt like he had choices again. Real choices, not just the quiet resignation of exile. "I want to keep helping people," he said finally. "But maybe I can do more than just treat injuries in a frontier clinic." Queen Zara's eyes lit up with possibility. "I might have some ideas about that." 6 months after the events on Kepler 442b, David stood on the observation deck of the medical station, Unity's Hope, watching supply ships from a dozen different worlds dock with their cargo of medicine and equipment. The station orbited a contested region where 3 different species were locked in a bitter territorial dispute. But here, in this neutral space, their people worked together to save lives. It had been Queen Zara's idea, but David had helped design every detail. When the conspirators behind the assassination attempt were exposed, both human and Zephyrian governments found themselves under enormous pressure to do something positive with the renewed attention on cross-species cooperation. The medical station project had been the perfect solution. "Dr. Chen," called out Nurse Riley, a young human woman who had volunteered for the program. "We have incoming casualties from the Altarian refugee camps. Looks like another outbreak of the fever." David nodded and headed toward the medical bay. The Altarian fever was a new disease that affected multiple species differently, making it a perfect challenge for their mixed medical team. Human doctors brought their diagnostic techniques, Zephyrian healers contributed their understanding of bioenergy, and the Altarian medics provided crucial knowledge about their own physiology. As he entered the medical bay, David saw Queen Zara, already there, her hands steady as she operated a bioscanner over a young Altarian child. She had given up her throne 6 months ago, passing the crown to her younger sister, while taking on the new role of Director of Interspecies Medical Exchange. The decision had shocked the Zephyrian Empire, but David understood her reasoning. How? Is she? David asked, checking the child's vital signs. Stable, but we need to adjust the treatment formula again. The fever is adapting faster than we expected. They worked together in comfortable silence, the way they had learned to do over the past months. David had discovered that Queen Zara, who now insisted he call her simply Zara, had extensive medical training from her youth. In Zephyrian culture, rulers were expected to be able to heal as well as lead. The formula modifications are working, David reported after running the new treatment through their analysis system. We should be able to help all the refugees within the next few days. Zara smiled with relief. Good. I was worried we might lose some of them. As they finished treating the patients, David reflected on how much his life had changed. The secret of his sacrifice was now public knowledge across the galaxy. Documentary films had been made about the doctor who prevented a war. Universities offered him honorary degrees. Politicians wanted to use his story for their campaigns, but David had turned down all of it. Instead, he had chosen this, working alongside Zara to build something that neither of their species could have created alone. David, Zara said as they completed their shift, we just received a message from the Corridor Council. They want us to expand the program to 12 more systems. The Corridor Council was a new interspecies organization that had formed in response to the revelations about the conspiracy. David and Zara's medical station had become a symbol of what cooperation could accomplish, and other worlds wanted similar programs. 12 systems is a lot, David said thoughtfully. We'd need more staff, more ships, more funding. The funding is approved. Earth and the Zephyrian Empire are both contributing, along with 6 other governments. As for staff, Zara paused, looking almost nervous. I have a proposal. David had learned to recognize that look. It usually meant Zara had an idea that was brilliant but complicated. What kind of proposal? What if we don't just expand the medical program? What if we create something bigger, a full diplomatic and humanitarian corps? Teams that can go anywhere, in the galaxy where there's suffering, regardless of politics or species. David considered the idea. It was ambitious beyond anything they had discussed before. That would mean taking on conflicts that governments can't or won't handle. We'd be operating outside normal diplomatic channels. Exactly. There are so many places where people are suffering because their leaders can't find common ground. Places where a small team with medical supplies and good intentions could make a real difference. David walked over to the observation window and looked out at the stars. Somewhere out there were worlds where species fought over resources while their people went hungry. Systems where ancient prejudices prevented cooperation even in the face of natural disasters. Colonies where fear of outsiders meant that treatable diseases went untreated. It would be dangerous, he said quietly. Yes. We'd be operating with minimal support from our home governments. Yes. Some places wouldn't welcome us. We might not always be able to help. Yes. Zara joined him at the window. But David, look what we've accomplished here. 6 months ago, this region was on the verge of a 3-way war. Now their representatives are sharing research data and coordinating relief efforts. One medical station changed everything. David thought about the young Altarian girl they had just treated, who would grow up in a galaxy where her species wasn't. Automatically enemies with humans and Zephyrians. He thought about the nurses and doctors from different worlds who had become friends while working together. He thought about the message they were sending to the galaxy. That cooperation was possible, that differences didn't have to mean conflict. We'd need a ship, he said finally. something that could carry medical supplies and serve as a mobile base. Zara's face lit up. I've already talked to the shipbuilders on Titan Station. They're designing something special. Part hospital, part diplomatic vessel, part research laboratory. Of course you have. David couldn't help but smile. What would we call this organization? I was thinking, the Unity Corps. Simple, but it says what we're about. David liked it. Unity Corps, not human, not Zephyrian, not tied to any one government or species. Just people who wanted to help other people. There's one more thing, Zara said carefully. The Corps would need leaders, co-directors who understand both the medical and diplomatic sides of what we're trying to do. David turned to look at her, understanding what she was asking. You want us to do this together, permanently? I can't think of anyone else I'd rather work with. Can you? David thought about his quiet life as a frontier doctor, the years he had spent believing his sacrifice was meaningless. Then he thought about the past 6 months, working with Zara to create something that was already changing how species interacted with each other. What about the politics? There are still people on both sides who don't trust our partnership. Let them be suspicious. Results speak louder than politics. When people see what the Unity Corps can accomplish, the critics will have less to complain about. A soft chime indicated an incoming message. David activated the communication system, and the holographic image of Admiral Peterson from Earth Fleet Command appeared in the room. Dr. Chen, your Director Zara, the Admiral said formally. I have a request from the Earth Council. There's a situation developing in the Vega system. Refugee camps are overwhelmed, and local authorities are requesting assistance. Are you available for deployment? David and Zara exchanged glances. This would be their first major mission together since the conspiracy was exposed, their first chance to prove that their partnership could work on a larger scale. We'll take it, David said without hesitation. Excellent. Prepare for departure. In 12 hours, and Dr. Chen, good luck. As the communication ended, David realized that his life had come full circle. 10 years ago, he had risked everything to save one alien queen in the hope of preventing a war. Now he and that same queen were about to risk everything again, but this time to save as many lives as possible across the galaxy. Are you ready for this? Zara asked. David looked around the medical station they had built together, at the staff from different worlds working side by side, at the ships bringing supplies and hope to people who had never expected help from strangers. It was proof that cooperation was possible, that the sacrifice he had made 10 years ago had been worth it. I've been ready for this my whole life, he said. I just didn't know it until now. 3 hours later, they were aboard their new ship, a sleek vessel that combined the best technology from multiple species. As they prepared to depart for the Vega system, David stood on the bridge next to Zara, watching the stars ahead of them. The galaxy was vast and full of conflict, suffering, and misunderstanding. But it was also full of people who wanted to help each other, if they could just find a way to work together. The Unity Corps would give them that chance. David had once been willing to die to save one life and prevent one war. Now, he was ready to spend the rest of his life saving as many lives as possible and building as much peace as the galaxy would allow. The ship jumped to faster-than-light speed, carrying its message of hope toward the stars.